The old stone building that housed the Harmony Creek Historical Society smelled of aged paper, beeswax polish, and faint, lingering dust. For years, Eleanor had found solace within its quiet walls, dedicating her Tuesdays and Thursdays to organizing documents, cataloging artifacts, and ensuring the delicate balance of the past was maintained with care. It was volunteer work, unpaid, often unnoticed, but it gave structure and purpose to her days, a quiet counterpoint to the sometimes lonely rhythm of life after her husband George had passed. Eleanor was, by nature, a woman who noticed details, not just the grand narratives of history, but the small, telling things. A faint ink smudge on a soldier's letter that spoke of hurried writing, a barely perceptible tear in a velvet curtain that hinted at years of use, the precise angle at which a teacup should be placed on its saucer for perfect balance. To Eleanor, these minutiae weren't trivial. They were threads in the intricate tapestry of time, each holding a piece of the larger story. This meticulousness, however, wasn't always appreciated by everyone. The younger volunteers, bright-eyed and enthusiastic, but often less patient, would sometimes tease her gently. "Still polishing the hinges, Eleanor?" young Tom would joke, referring to her habit of ensuring even the unseen parts of display cases were free from grime. Sarah, who preferred arranging exhibits based on color palettes rather than strict chronology, would sigh when Eleanor pointed out a date discrepancy on a label. "Oh, Eleanor, does it really matter?" she'd ask, implying that such tiny inaccuracies wouldn't be noticed by casual visitors. Even George, bless his practical soul, had sometimes been perplexed by her need for precision. She remembered one evening, early in their marriage, when she had spent an hour rearranging the books on a shelf, not by subject or author, but by height, creating a perfectly graded slope. George had walked in, smiled fondly, and said, "My dear, the books hold the same stories no matter how tall they are." He hadn't meant to be unkind, but she'd felt a familiar prickle of being misunderstood, of her deep-seated need for order being seen as merely a quirky compulsion. It wasn't just about tidiness for Eleanor. Her need for things to be right, perfectly aligned, accurately labeled, stemmed from something deeper, a quiet yearning for control in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. She thought back to her childhood home, a busy, bustling place where four younger siblings demanded constant attention. Amidst the cheerful noise and occasional mess, Eleanor had found a quiet corner of sanity in her own small bedroom, keeping it immaculately tidy, her dolls lined up with military precision, her crayons sharpened to perfect points. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could impose order when the rest of the world felt overwhelming. Later, as a young woman, she'd worked as a secretary, a job where precision was paramount, reinforcing her natural inclination. The Historical Society was currently buzzing with a different kind of energy. A major grant had been secured, finally allowing for the restoration of the building's magnificent, but sadly neglected, cupola. More importantly, the grant came with a visit from Mrs. Agnes Fletcher, a formidable figure in the world of historical preservation, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. Mrs. Fletcher's approval could open doors to future funding and recognition, while her disapproval, well, no one wanted to think about that. Everyone was on edge. The Society's director, Mr. Harrison, a kind but somewhat disheveled man, more passionate about local folklore than structural integrity, was panicking about the upcoming inspection. He'd instructed the volunteers to focus on the main attractions, dusting the portraits of founding families, polishing the antique furniture, and ensuring the visitor's log was neatly presented. Eleanor, however, couldn't ignore the little things. While Sarah artfully arranged brochures and Tom struggled with a wobbly display stand, Eleanor found herself in the dusty, rarely visited storage room behind the archives. It was here that discarded items, uncatalogued donations, and forgotten boxes lay in jumbled heaps. Mr. Harrison had told them not to bother with it. Mrs. Fletcher won't see that mess. But Eleanor saw it. She saw the dust bunnies the size of mice, the precarious stack of old newspapers yellowing at the edges, the way a broken picture frame lay carelessly tossed on top of a fragile textile. Her hands itched to bring order to the chaos. Ignoring the director's instructions, she spent hours back there, carefully sorting, gently cleaning, making small notes in her personal notebook about items that seemed potentially significant but were simply labeled MISC. She found a stack of faded photographs tucked inside a rusty tin box labeled Old Bills. Most were blurry landscapes, but at the bottom she found a small, sepia-toned portrait of a stern-looking woman and two young girls. Written faintly on the back in spidery ink were the words, Eliza and her daughters, 1898. Nothing more. She added it to a small pile of items to investigate further when she had time. The day of Mrs. Fletcher's visit dawned bright and clear, highlighting every speck of dust the volunteers had missed despite their hurried efforts. Everyone was dressed in their best, a nervous energy crackling in the air. Eleanor wore her simple, sensible gray dress and comfortable shoes, her usual uniform for work at the society. She helped set out refreshments, ensuring the napkins were folded just so, and the sugar lumps were neatly arranged. As the other volunteers buzzed around, putting last-minute touches on displays, she felt a familiar sense of being on the periphery, useful for quiet tasks, but not central to the important show. Mrs. Fletcher arrived, a woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a posture that radiated authority. Mr. Harrison, looking even more disheveled than usual, greeted her effusively, leading her through the main exhibit rooms. The volunteers trailed behind, offering nervous smiles. Mrs. Fletcher praised the restoration work on the cupola, nodding approvingly at the polished furniture. She asked intelligent questions about the prominent families featured in the portraits. Sarah confidently spoke about the history of local agriculture, and Tom explained the provenance of a set of antique tools. Eleanor stood quietly at the back, ready to fetch more tea if needed. As they moved towards the archives entrance, Mrs. Fletcher paused. She wasn't looking at the grand, leather-bound ledgers Mr. Harrison was proudly displaying. She was looking at a small, almost hidden corner near the doorway where a stack of old journals sat on a trolley, waiting to be moved. One of them was slightly askew, and a single dried leaf had fallen onto the cover. "Mr. Harrison," Mrs. Fletcher said, her voice clear and caring. "These appear to be the original journals from the early days, yes?" "Oh, yes, Mrs. Fletcher," Mr. Harrison said, stepping forward quickly. "Valuable records indeed. We're hoping to get them properly cataloged eventually." "Eventually?" Mrs. Fletcher's eyebrow rose slightly. Her gaze fell on the misplaced journal, the dried leaf. Eleanor felt a familiar pang, the small things that others overlooked, signaling a lack of care. Mrs. Fletcher walked closer to the trolley. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, scanned the spines of the journals. She reached out and gently picked up the journal that was out of place. As she did, she noticed the dried leaf. She also noticed, in the same moment, a small, almost invisible scuff mark on the trolley itself, and the faint cobweb filament clinging to the edge of the shelf nearby. Her gaze swept the area, taking in the small imperfections that indicated hasty preparation, a focus on the visible surfaces at the expense of true, thorough care. Maintaining a historical society is not merely about displaying artifacts, Mrs. Fletcher said, turning back to Mr. Harrison and the volunteers. It is about preservation. It is about respect for the past, down to the smallest detail. A single misplaced item, a speck of dust in a forgotten corner, can speak volumes about the underlying health and dedication of an institution. Her words hung in the air, a quiet rebuke. Mr. Harrison looked flustered. The younger volunteers exchanged uneasy glances. Eleanor felt a familiar ache. The world valued the big picture, the grand gestures, while the quiet, persistent work of caring for the details went unnoticed, sometimes even scorned. Then Mrs. Fletcher's gaze found Eleanor, standing quietly at the edge of the group. Eleanor hadn't polished these specific journals or that trolley, but she had spent years tending to the small, forgotten things throughout the building. Something in her posture, her quiet attentiveness, perhaps the simple honesty of her sensible dress amidst the others' more formal attire, seemed to catch Mrs. Fletcher's eye. "And you, madam?" Mrs. Fletcher addressed Eleanor directly. "What is your role here?" Eleanor stepped forward, feeling a surge of nervousness. "I'm a volunteer, Mrs. Fletcher. I mostly work in the archives, organizing and cataloging." Mrs. Fletcher nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "I see. Do you notice details, madam? The small things that others might overlook? Eleanor hesitated for a fraction of a second, the memories of George, of the younger volunteers flashing through her mind. But looking into Mrs. Fletcher's discerning eyes, she felt a strange sense of permission, a recognition she hadn't expected. Yes, Mrs. Fletcher, she replied, her voice soft but steady. I suppose I do. The details, they tell the story, don't they? A slow smile spread across Mrs. Fletcher's face. It wasn't a warm smile, but it was genuine, acknowledging. Indeed they do, madam. They tell the most important stories of all. She turned back to the group. Mr. Harrison, she announced, her voice regaining its formal tone. The work on the cupola is commendable. The main exhibits are adequately presented. However, I see signs that the vital heart of this institution, the preservation of its core collection, the meticulous care of its entirety, not just the showpieces, requires greater focus. This level of detail, this commitment to the unseen, is paramount. She gestured towards Eleanor. This is the kind of dedication this society needs to cultivate. People who understand that history is not just about names and dates, but about the textures, the whispers, the tiny truths embedded in the artifacts themselves. Later, after Mrs. Fletcher had departed, leaving behind a stunned silence and a whirlwind of new directives focused on preservation and detailed cataloging, Mr. Harrison approached Eleanor. He looked humbled, enlightened. Eleanor, he said, his voice full of respect. Mrs. Fletcher was right. I apologize if I haven't always appreciated your unique contribution. Your attention to detail is exactly what we need. That storage room, I peeked in there after she left. It's incredible what you managed. The way you sorted those photographs. He trailed off, shaking his head in wonder. The younger volunteers, witnessing Mr. Harrison's sincere apology and hearing Mrs. Fletcher's praise, looked at Eleanor with new eyes. Sarah approached her shyly. Eleanor, about that date discrepancy, could you show me how you check the cross-references? I'd like to learn to be more thorough. Tom offered to help her move some of the heavier archival boxes. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest, deeper and more satisfying than any external praise. It wasn't just about being right, it was about being seen, truly seen, for the quiet strength she possessed, the value in the way her mind worked. The society underwent a transformation in the following months. With Mrs. Fletcher's support, grants flowed in, specifically earmarked for preservation projects that required meticulous work. Mr. Harrison formally asked Eleanor to head the new Collection Care and Detail Verification Committee, a role that was essentially a promotion, giving her the authority and resources to implement the high standards she had always quietly maintained. She trained the younger volunteers not just on procedures, but on the philosophy of caring for the past, teaching them to look beyond the obvious, to find the stories in the smudges and the significance in the seemingly insignificant. She shared her love for the details and in doing so, fostered a new appreciation among the staff. Her life gained a new dimension. She was no longer just a quiet volunteer. She was an expert, a leader, a vital heart of the institution. The sting of past misunderstandings faded, replaced by the quiet confidence of purpose and belonging. She still loved her quiet routine, her perfectly aligned teacups at home, the meticulous order of her own small world. But now that world had expanded, and her particular way of seeing, once dismissed as a quirk, was finally recognized as the valuable gift it had always been. She had found a place where her attention to the smallest detail made all the difference in preserving the largest story of all.